She said she was in the relationship of her dreams. A thoughtful man, gift, tender, smart, almost too perfect. But it was exactly this perfection that destroyed her life. Because some relationships don't start with shouting. They start with flowers, with long messages, with promises too intense to be true. And when you realize something is wrong, you are already emotionally trapped. What you will discover today is disturbing. There are people capable of simulating love with surgical precision. People who study their needs, their fears, their traumas, and they use all of this as a control tool. And perhaps the scariest thing is not the physical violence, but the fact that for months, sometimes years, you believe you found love of your life. If you've ever felt like someone seemed too normal, maybe this video will help you understand why. Why? The story begins like so many others. Intense looks, deep conversations at first, weak, an inexplicable connection. He said he had never felt anything like this, she neither. Everything seemed too synchronized to be a coincidence. He liked the same songs. I had the same opinions, shared traumas similar. It was as if it had been custom molded. And maybe it was. Functional psychopaths do not reveal themselves in chaos. They reveal themselves perfectly. Build an ideal version of themselves. Observe, adapt, adjust. They are emotional chameleons. At first he sent good morning messages at 6 a.m. I planned surprises, did public statements. I talked about the future in the first month. She felt chosen, special. View. But discreetly, he began to map his vulnerabilities. She was afraid of abandonment. He promised to never leave. She had a history of rejection. He reinforced that no one would ever love her like he did. Without realizing it, she was being built inside an emotional bubble where he was the gravitational center. Healthy relationships grow little by little, but relationships with psychopaths explode too quickly. Intensity is not love, it's strategy. The unsettling detail: he never seemed nervous. He never showed guilt, never lost real emotional control. He was always rational, always calm, always in command. While she gave herself away emotionally, he analyzed. Because, for a psychopath, people are not partners. These are projects. And when love becomes a project, someone will always be discarded. You might be thinking, but aren't psychopaths violent criminals? Some are, but many wear suits. They wear rings. They sleep next to you. The question that needs to be asked is not whether they exist. It's whether you would know how to recognize one before it was too late. In the next block, you will understand how the mask of love is constructed with precision, almost scientific, and why the most beautiful phase of a relationship may actually be the first sign of danger. Nothing about that relationship was spontaneous. It was rehearsed. Psychopaths don't love like ordinary people. They study, observe patterns, test reactions, and when they find what they're looking for, an open emotional need, they begin the process that modern psychology calls love bombing. At first, everything seems like a healthy intensity. He sends constant messages. Just call to hear your voice. Talk about living together before you even meet your friends. It seems decided, safe, passionate. But this intensity has a function: create dependency. The human brain responds to intense stimuli with the release of dopamine and oxytocin. The more attention, validation, and promise of exclusivity you receive, the more your emotional system becomes attached. It's chemistry. It's biology. And he knows it. Functional psychopaths have high cognitive empathy. They understand emotions. But they don't feel the same way. They can map out what you want to hear. Do you know when stare? When it touches your hand? When to silence to generate mystery? While you believe you've found rare connection, he's testing which versions of himself they even work better. He doesn't reveal who he is. It builds who you want it to be. Notice how everything happens too quickly. Travel planned in the second week. Public statements in the first month. Expensive gifts for no apparent reason. Haste is strategic. Normal relationships build intimacy over time. Psychopaths speed up because know that the sooner you get deeply involved, the less rational your subsequent analysis. It's a race against your lucidity, and there is another almost invisible detail: exaggerated idealization. He says you are different from everyone else he has met, that you never felt something like that you are connected souls. But watch carefully. He says it with frightening ease, as if it had been repeated before, because he probably repeated it. Psychopaths see relationships as experiences, not as bonds. Each new person is an opportunity for emotional entertainment, a new stage, a new plathay. And during this perfect phase, there are small tests. He tells her a sad story and watches her reaction. Pretends insecurity to measure your be careful. It provokes subtle jealousy to assess your fear of loss. Your every reaction is recorded. He learns what makes you smile, what makes you cry, what destabilizes you, and the more he learns, the more power he accumulates. If something here starts to make sense to you, stick with it until the end. What's next? It can change the way you observe people. Because love bombing is not the end goal, it's just the construction of the cage. You believe you are entering a fairy tale, but in fact, it is being involved in an emotional structure where he controls rhythm, intensity, and direction. And the most dangerous? He seems genuinely happy. Psychopaths do not present the nervousness common to those who lie. Your levels reduced of anxiety and guilt make his statements extremely convincing. There is no tremor in the voice. There is no hesitation. There is conviction. As you fall in love with the idealized version of him, he watches how far he can go. And when you realize that you are already emotionally invested, the intensity begins to change. Not abruptly, in a calculated way. Small absences, small criticisms, small strategic silences, and you, who were being inundated with attention, begin to struggle to recover that initial phase. This is where the game really begins, because the perfect mask isn't just for seducing. It's so that when your behavior changes, you doubt yourself, and don't of him. But what exactly changes? What signs go unnoticed when perfection begins to crack? In the next block, you will see the invisible signs that almost no one notices, until you are already emotionally trapped. Change never begins with violence. It starts with confusion. After the perfect phase, something subtle changes. He no longer responds as quickly. Stay colder on certain days. And when you ask if everything is okay, he smiles and says that you are exaggerating. This is where gaslighting begins. Gaslighting is not a direct attack. It's a slow erosion of your perception. It changes small narratives, deny phrases you said, reinterpret situations. I never said that. You are too sensitive. You create problems where there are none. At first you doubt it for a second. Then you start to doubt frequently. Until he begins to question his own memory. Psychopaths don't need to scream. They prefer to destabilize. Meanwhile, emotional isolation sets in almost imperceptibly. He comments that he doesn't like a certain friend of his. He says his family doesn't understand your relationship. It suggests that certain people are jealous of the couple's happiness. Nothing is imposed. It is suggested. And you, wanting to protect the relationship, begin to voluntarily move away. Without realizing it, it becomes your main, sometimes only, emotional reference. Another invisible sign is the constant inversion of blame. When he fails the responsibility, it's never completely his. If it was rude, you provoked it. If he ignored it, he was tired of his cause. If he lied, it was to prevent you from overreacting. The blame always comes back to you. Over time, you start to apologize for things you don't even really understand. This dynamic is not accidental. Psychopaths have marked manipulative traits instrumental. They see conflicts as opportunities to reposition power. Each discussion is a board. Your every emotion is a piece. And there is something even more disturbing. Emotional coldness. When you cry, he watches. You can even hug. But there's something in the look that doesn't correspond to the depth of the situation. It's as if he's representing empathy, because in many cases it is. The difference between cognitive empathy and emotional empathy is key here. He understands that you feel, but don't sit together. This allows you to use your emotions as a tool strategic. He knows when you are fragile, and choose exactly these moments to test limits. Another almost invisible sign is control disguised as care. He suggests you change your clothes because he cares. Give your opinion on your friendships because he wants the best. Questions their individual plans because the couple must decide together. Nothing looks like abuse in isolation, but added together, it becomes a structure. You start asking for permission without realizing it. Start measuring words. Start to anticipate his reactions before acting. This is the critical point, when your spontaneity wanes. Psychopaths need control to maintain a sense of superiority, and the control emotional is more efficient than physical. It shapes your behavior until you become vigilant of yourself. Meanwhile, his past remains cloudy, stories poorly explained, old relationships always described with him as a victim, unstable ex-partners, obsessive, problematic. You feel compassion, but you don't notice the pattern. All previous conflicts end with him innocent, and the others unbalanced. Could it be a coincidence? There is also a disturbing detail, the real absence of regret. He can ask apologies, it can promise change, but repetition of behavior reveals that the guilt was never internalized, because guilt implies moral discomfort, and many psychopaths do not experience this discomfort in the same way as most of people. Over time, you feel like something is wrong, but he can't name it. After all, he never really screamed. He was never physically aggressive, never lost control like a classic villain. And that's exactly what makes everything more dangerous. You're stuck with someone who knows exactly what he's doing, and does it without remorse. The question that begins to echo in your mind is silent but devastating. If he seemed perfect at first, which version was true? And more importantly, what happens when someone who has never felt guilt decides that, are you no longer fit for the game? There is something deeply disturbing about the mind of a high-functioning psychopath. It's not chaos. It is the internal silence. While you suffer, question, cry, and try to understand what is happening, he remains stable, rational, almost unshakable. And that is not emotional strength. It's an emotional absence. Neuroscience studies indicate that individuals with psychopathic traits present reduced activity in the amygdala, a region of the brain associated with fear and response emotional, and atypical functioning in the prefrontal cortex, responsible for decision-making, moral decision, and impulse control. What does this mean in practice? That they understand social rules, but they don't feel them. They know that cheating hurts. They know that manipulating destroys. They know that lying corrodes confidence. But this understanding is logical, not visceral. While most people experience guilt as a physical weight on their chest, the psychopath experiences only risk calculation. Have I been discovered? Does this hurt me? How can I reverse the situation? There is no genuine remorse. There is strategy. This difference is subtle and devastating, because in an argument you seek emotional resolution. He seeks advantage. You want closeness. He wants control. The relationship was never about bonding. It was about psychological mastery. Functional psychopaths have high cognitive empathy. They can identify emotions with surgical precision. They can imitate expressions, adjust the tone of voice, choose words that convey regret. But this empathy is a tool. It's like a brilliant actor who understands the script, but doesn't feel the scene. This explains why, after hurting you deeply, he can sleep peacefully, can go out with friends. You can post photos smiling. While you are trying to rebuild your own identity, he is already analyzing the next movement. Another disturbing aspect is the chronic internal emptiness. Many psychopaths report constant feelings of boredom, an emptiness that needs to be filled with intense stimuli. Conquest, seduction, risk. Relationships, in this context, become emotional entertainment. At first, you represent challenge, mystery, news. When he feels that he has mastered his reactions, interest decreases, not because you changed, but because the game lost its fun. The coldness that begins to emerge is not the result of conflict, it is a consequence of saturation. And here comes a crucial point, the internal division. Many psychopaths describe feeling as if there are two versions of themselves. A socially adapted version, charming, articulate, functional. And the predatory version, calculating, detached, manipulative. To the world, he is competent. For you, too intimate, it reveals subtle cracks. But even in those cracks, there is control. He rarely loses total dominance, because losing control means losing power, and power is the true psychological fuel. You may wonder, has he ever truly loved someone? The answer is complex. They may experience attraction, functional attachment, interest, but deep love involves genuine vulnerability, and vulnerability implies risk emotional. Psychopaths avoid real emotional risk, because to love you have to put yourself on the same level as others. And for those who see relationships like hierarchy, equality is a threat. Therefore, when the mask begins to fall, there is no immediate dramatic explosion. There is cold detachment. There is reduced contact. There are small displays of contempt, and you start to feel like you're competing for attention that was previously given to you. Excess. The truth is, he was never emotionally where you believed he was. He was above, observing, evaluating. While you were wondering how to improve, he was deciding how much time was still worth investing. And when someone who doesn't feel guilt decides to end a relationship, what prevents is this closure brutal? In the next block, you will understand how the mask finally falls, and why the moment of rupture is often more traumatic than the entire relationship. Disruption rarely happens explosively at first. It starts with an awkward silence. You realize that something has changed for good. It's no longer just occasional coldness, it's a real absence. He no longer makes plans. He no longer shows the same interest. Reply to messages with calculated delay. And when you try to talk, he seems distant. There is no intense discussion. There is no passionate drama. There is indifference. And indifference hurts more than screams. Because, at that moment, you are still emotionally invested. Still try recover the initial version of it. That attentive, intense, almost perfect man. But this version was construction. Now what emerges is the predator disinterested in the game itself. Emotional discard is one of the cruelest phases of the psychopathic cycle. After the idealization and devaluation comes cold abandonment. Sometimes it ends abruptly. Sometimes it keeps you around while it already invests in someone else. Because the breakup is not about closure. It's about replacement. Many psychopaths are not alone between relationships. They have already started the next one bond even before finalizing the current one. You feel something is wrong. But when you confront him, he accuses you of paranoia. You're imagining things. I'm just focused on work. You are very insecure. And in the meantime, he already directs attention to another source of stimulus. When he finally decides to call it quits, he can do so with surgical coolness. No tears, no tremor in the voice, no real show of pain. He can even reverse the role, saying that you have become difficult, that lost its shine, who is emotionally unstable, and you, weakened, begin to ask yourself, did I really screw up? This is the most dangerous point, because trauma doesn't just come from loss. It comes from distortion. You start reviewing memories, trying to understand where you went wrong. Ignore old signals. Minimizes manipulation episodes. Just remember the perfect phase. It's a psychological phenomenon called intermittent reinforcement. Intense moments of affection mixed with periods of coldness create a pattern of dependence similar to addiction. Your brain is conditioned to look for that initial reward. That's why breaking up with a psychopath can be more devastating than a relationship. Traditionally toxic. You don't just feel sadness, feel withdrawal. And while you grieve, he seems to move on with impressive ease. Can post photos smiling. You can start a new relationship in a few weeks. You can act as if nothing had happened. This creates a silent, humiliating pain. Why do you wonder? Was I real to him? The answer is difficult to accept. You were helpful. It was validation. It was emotional entertainment. It was a source of control. But it wasn't a bond in the deep sense you imagined. And when the mask falls completely, you realize you never truly knew that person. You met a character adapted to your needs. The shock is not just about the end. It's for the revelation that the entire relationship may have been a psychological experiment. And then the question arises that echoes with overwhelming force. How can someone share a bed, plans, secrets, and never feel guilty about it? Manipulate all this? If love was just a simulation, what does that say about the human capacity to hide evil under the appearance of perfection? Perhaps the scariest thing isn't the manipulation. Be normal. Because the functional psychopath does not present himself as a threat. He works, smiles, attends social events, can be admired by colleagues. It may seem balanced, smart, reliable. He doesn't look like a villain, and that's exactly why it's dangerous. The idea that evil always comes with obvious signs is comfortable. Makes us believe that we can identify danger from a distance. But relational psychopathy is silent. It infiltrates the routine. It settles into the details. Grow in confidence. And when we realize it, we are already emotionally intertwined. What makes this dynamic so disturbing is the realization that evil does not always shout. Sometimes he watches, calculate, wait. Relationships with psychopaths are not just marked by pain. They are marked by confusion. You don't know exactly when you started losing your voice. Don't know when he started to apologize for feeling it. You don't know when you stopped trusting your self-perception. But you know something has been corroded inside. And perhaps the biggest wound is not the breakup, be the breaking of belief. The belief that intensity means love. The belief that passionate promises indicate depth. The belief that anyone who seems too perfect cannot be hiding something. Functional psychopaths exist in all social contexts. Not everyone is a criminal violent. Many will never commit a physical crime. But they can leave a deep psychological trace. Because manipulating emotions, distorting reality, and exploiting vulnerabilities is also a form of violence. Silent, invisible, difficult to prove, and that's why the most important question is not, what are they like? It's, why do we ignore signs when they appear? Lack? Afraid of being alone? Do you want to live a story too intense to be questioned? Evil rarely presents itself as a monster. He presents himself as a solution. If this content made you think differently about the human mind, sign up. Here we explore what almost no one wants to see. Now I want you to respond in the comments with complete sincerity. Have you ever had a relationship that started out too perfect? At what point something inside? Did you notice something was wrong, but you ignored it? Because perhaps sharing this insight is the first step to reclaiming your own lucidity. In the end, the question remains open and disturbing. If someone can simulate love so accurately, how many perfect relationships around you are, in fact, just very good masks? Built, and even more disturbing. Would you have the courage to see it if it were yours?